Welcome, everyone. I'm Deborah Briones, Deputy General Counsel at Prologis. It's a privilege to be here in London today, a critical hub in trade, finance, logistics, and a perfect place for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about risks and opportunities facing global companies today, and we're here with three experts who will bring incredible insights on how to manage these risks. We have here John Scott, who's the head of sustainability risk at Zurich Insurance. You've done extensive work with the World Economic Forum, and you are a leading voice on climate risk. We have James Krask here with us, who's the global head of multinational clients at Marsh Advisory. James does work with the top companies in managing risk and is the committee chair of ISO, the International Standards Committee, building standards for resilience. And we have Martin Thormalen, CTO of Business Tech at Munich Re, at the forefront of AI and technology in our industry. So let's get started. So, John, extreme weather. Extreme weather is impacting how we live, how businesses operate. How does extreme weather impact the global supply chain, and what can businesses do to build resilience against this global threat?
Sure. I mean, it won't have escaped anybody's attention that we have all sorts of varieties of extreme weather going on at the moment, and in differing patterns, different geographic distribution, different levels of intensity, and in some cases, different levels of frequency. So whether that's floods in all its manifestations, whether it's river floods, pluvial flooding, which is down cloudburst type flooding, or whether it's storm surge flooding, which we saw on the Florida coast just last week, or whether it's wildfires associated with drought or severe convective hailstorms, or even the more chaotic weather systems like tropical cyclones and so on. All these things seem to be changing their patterns. The scientists tell us that is related in some way to climate change. It's a very complex relationship. It's difficult to understand that. We've got lots of people trying to figure that out in my industry. But the point is, I think from a broad industry perspective, just take it that this stuff is happening. And so it's all about how do you respond to it and how do you build resilience. And I think number one, in your supply chain, it's really thinking about diversification of supply. You know, these events tend to be geographically, locally sort of happening. And so it's just really important to know that if you're losing a supply from one geography, that you've got an alternative geography. So diversification, really important. Of course, you can build in kind of resilience from a hard point of view. You know, you can build in flood defenses on rivers or in cities or in ports. You can build, you know, sort of floodgates and so on if we get storm surges. That's really important for people who own infrastructure like ports. But of course, it's not just about the hard defenses, it's about the soft defenses too. In the communities in which your businesses and sectors operate in, it's making sure that your suppliers, your customers, the communities are protected as well, that there's early warning systems, or in the case of flood, that there's somewhere for the water to go.
James, how are you seeing these risks showing up in the supply chain, and why do you think it's so difficult for businesses to manage these risks?
Yeah, good question. Quite frankly, they're showing up as unexpected disruptions. So they seemingly come out of the blue and cause disruption to an organization. And that's linked to the second part of your question. You know, why is it so hard to kind of manage these issues? It's hard because it's really difficult to understand what your supply chain looks like below what would typically be considered your primary suppliers, the people that the organizations are in touch with on a day-to-day basis. But we know from evidence that it's what happens below that level that matters. And that broader ecosystem of businesses and third parties that companies rely upon are exposed to risks that are just not on your radar as an organization. So they manifest as disruptions out of the blue. Before coming here today, there was a news article about how the hurricane in the US has impacted on the supplies of a very pure type of quartz that's used in semiconductor manufacturing. So there's a couple of mines that have been impacted, flooded, And that's going to have an impact on the global supply chain. I mean, who'd have thought that a small little location in the US would have global consequences? And that's why it's difficult, because you can't see these risks until they occur.
Sure. And Martin, we're seeing businesses use technology to react faster and faster. How can businesses use technology to prepare for these extreme weather events, supply chain disruptions? How can businesses build resilience using technology?
Yeah, very good question, Deborah. So I think at Munich Re, we're already working with NatCat events and now also climate change since more than 140 years, right? And we see climate change is happening, weather events are getting worse, and it's not only more storms or more rain and whatnot, it can also be more drought and then less rain. So it can be all kinds of things, and therefore it's important to understand these changes. At Munich Re, we have used our historical data set of the last 100 plus years and have created now a climate change kind of prediction models so that everyone who has a list of a lot of properties globally in a supply chain, like clear risk and clear scores for that, so that you can analyze what impact will climate change have on your destinations, on your properties, on your warehouses and whatnot. And here it's super important to find the right ones, as also James and John have pointed out, find the ones that can stay as they are because they might not be impacted due to the climate change, but also find the ones that are highly at risk, and then you need to take measures and potentially also change some of your locations going forward. So it's really about seeing the full portfolio and then acting on the portfolio, what can stay and what should be kind of adjusted going forward.
Geopolitical risks are looming everywhere. James, what is your advice for businesses navigating this landscape?
We could probably be here for the rest of the day kind of discussing that one question. It's a challenge, isn't it? Because you put a pin in the map, anywhere in the map, and it will hit upon some kind of geopolitical issue that seemingly needs to be at the top of your agenda and dealt with today. So it comes down to, for me, to a question of prioritization. What matters to you as an organization? And it links back to what Thomas was just saying about understanding your risk environment and understanding how risks are manifesting within your organization's ecosystem. So the first step for me is working out what that ecosystem looks like. So looking at the supply chain, looking deep within the supply chain, not just at your own assets that you can control, but the companies that you rely upon, wherever they might be operating, and look the other way as well, looking at the customer. So where are customers using some of your goods and services? Because that will have an impact on how geopolitical risk manifests itself at a business level for you. So that's the starting place. And my experience of having gone through this process with companies to get into the detail of where they're exposed to risk within their supply chain, you come back with some really surprising results. I mean, I've had organizations that didn't know they had tier 2 suppliers in Iran, or a concentration of suppliers in Israel, or issues in certain parts of Africa. So getting down to the detail of working out where you're exposed, that allows you to start thinking about how to manage some of those sort of point issues that might be the problem in each of those locations. So to finish, I think it's a case of not allowing yourself to be overwhelmed. Think about how these geopolitical risks matter to you and work on the things that should be your priority.
Sure. John, what geopolitical factors do you think companies are underestimating right now?
Yeah, really good. I think building on what James said, it's really important to do this detailed analysis of how your particular supply chain is impacted. But then there's also kind of a bigger picture. I often think with these kind of global risks that they're like people talk about black swans. They never saw that. They couldn't even imagine it. But I think most of these global risks, as Michelle Vucker says in her book on the grey rhino, these things are like grey rhinos. They're in full visibility. We know what these global risks are. It's just that sometimes we discount the impact. We're just not so aware, or we're fully aware of what could happen, but because it's ever present, we don't do anything about it. So I think there's some really big strategic issues here. I think it works on 3 levels. One is at a battle for hegemony, global hegemony level, which is essentially the battle between China and the US in many different domains, in space, in transport, on the land, on the sea. And I think that's just has to be built into your strategy. You have to think through, what does that mean for your business model, where your customers are, where your supply chain is. I think the second one is like a regional view. Is like what then stems from that global view? Who are the groups of countries which are in that sphere of influence? Does that make it more or less difficult for you in your strategy and in your supply chain? And then finally, as it always happens with these global risks, there is a local impact. So it's exactly what James was saying, bring it back to his comments, that you need to know at the very local level, and that's very detailed analysis, which fortunately, I'm sure Martin will talk about this, but this is how AI can also help us. It's so much quicker now to do that deep analysis of supply chains than, say, even 4 years ago.
All right, so let's turn to AI and technology. So Martin, you do extensive work on technology-driven business models. What should businesses be focusing on and thinking about as they're adopting AI and new tech, and what's the biggest mistake they could make?
Yeah, good point. So what we see nowadays with technology, it's possible to build new kind of insurance models like embedded insurance, and it's also possible to create better partnerships with others. And I think it's super important to always come from the business process and not start with the new technology, right? So we shouldn't have kind of a technology that's looking for a problem, but we need to start with the underlying business process and the underlying business goals. And therefore, I think it's more important to first start with a full stakeholder analysis. So who wants really what in these kind of partnership? What are the values that everybody wants to get out of it? And when it now comes to implementing AI nowadays, so it's no longer just using the internet going forward, but also leveraging AI, I think super crucial is that we have AI governance 100% implemented, and we have a full implemented strong AI governance that addresses the AI challenges correctly. And equally importantly, it's not only about data privacy or security. Nowadays with AI, there comes a new risk, that is the intellectual property. So we must not use any kind of AI where we are at risk that we are losing some of our internal, not internal knowledge and our internal intellectual property, exactly. So and then let me share 2 examples how we have implemented it. So we try not to boil the ocean with AI, but we leverage AI to create new products. And this is then also relatively risk-free. So for instance, we can create new insurance products that help then the supply chain and many other industries. And now we can implement new products way faster. Previously, it was months or even years. Now this goes down to minutes or a few days. And secondly, we can also analyze health data way better with AI. And this is anonymized, so there's also not a risk in AI ethics and so on and so forth. But this again helps the risk assessment. So we go down from weeks to a few hours or even minutes. So here it's a lot of potential with technology, including AI. And I think the second question was on the biggest mistake. What is the biggest mistake? I think the biggest mistake is really to go too fast into these new kind of technologies and having a team that is fully enthusiastic about technology, but doesn't have the devil's advocate and doesn't have the real business and a technology mix that we need. I think in total, we need a diverse team that embraces technology, but doesn't say that technology will solve all problems, right? So we need a good balance between business and IT going forward, as always, also in the past, I think.
James, how are you seeing businesses using technology, AI, to predict risk, to build resilience?
Well, one could argue we've been using AI for a long time to predict risk. A lot of the work that is done in our industry to predict risk, particularly climate change, is a form of predictive AI. And if you look at the adoption of that approach to managing or using AI to manage risk, it's quite prevalent in lots of different industries. What's new, obviously, is the generative AI element that is, we're all still getting to grips with, to be honest. But the one example I would use that I think is very tangible, sort of coming back to something that John was saying just a moment ago about the speed with which we can look into a supply chain and start to model risk. The traditional way of mapping a supply chain would have involved me phoning up my suppliers and asking them information about their suppliers, and them asking their information about their suppliers, and so forth. We can now do that just by looking at data, and we do this with companies all the time when we're accessing about 3.5 billion data records, trade data basically, and we can see in that data the physical exchange of goods taking place globally. So without actually having to go and ask the supplier, you can see what their supply chain looks like. Now, it's not 100% complete, but it's a big step forward in getting to the point where you can put pins on maps to work out where some of your exposures might be deep within the supply chain. And we worked with a very big automotive company not so long ago who'd done that traditional approach, and it had taken 4 or so years to get to a point where they felt comfortable they'd mapped a good chunk of their supply chain. That new approach took 72 hours, and in many cases got them better data, got them better insights. And that's not to say they were doing it wrong, it's just that the availability of the data and the way that we can now analyze that data with powerful AI engines has only really been available for the last 18 months, 2 years. So we're on the cusp of something, I think, quite a big change in the way that we can manage these risks because of AI.
Right, quite amazing potential, right? So Martin, as businesses are adopting AI and these new technologies and cyber risks are on the rise, how can businesses protect themselves?
Yeah, I think it's really very important, Deborah, that the businesses first understand that there is new risk. And with the advent of large language models, there's a whole variety of new large language model induced risks like jailbreaking or prompt injection and all kinds of things, model theft and so forth. So after these kind of, okay, I understand I have more risk, I can also start protecting. And on the flip side of this, we obviously can also leverage AI going forward to detect better cyber problems, like better phishing attacks can also be prevented going forward with better tooling. So we need to basically level up what we are doing. On the one hand side, educating our own staff and our own security team. On the other hand, implementing new tools that can detect these kind of new threats, including deepfakes, including advanced phishing attacks and whatnot. And then we have a better basis to be on the same level again, or hopefully better than the attackers going forward. And I think finally, if it's not 100% clear if all risks can be protected by just these measures and implementations, then obviously also insurers can come into the picture and take parts of this risk with cyber insurance going forward, right? And this is something that we are now implementing globally. I think cyber insurance is an important topic in many countries and potentially globally going forward.
John, how do you see cybersecurity fit into the bigger picture of resilience?
Well, it's a little bit like working off the geopolitical risks. I mean, the roots of cyber attacks are actually cyber espionage and country-sponsored cyber attacks. But of course, that also links strongly with criminality. And I think that's what makes it very important for businesses to work with national security agencies to work out where the attacks are coming from and to prepare themselves for that kind of attack. Of course, there's some basic hygiene factor things you can do in terms of, really simple things, patching, all your systems to make sure that, that your computer network is resilient, keeping it up to date and so on. And then some really important human reactions, making sure that you don't react to phishing or spear phishing attacks and so on. So all of these things require companies to have constant vigilance, and it's almost like a compliance thing, but it's behavioral.
And James, what's your take on all of this? How are businesses dealing with this?
As John said, it's a constant battle and evolution of your technology controls to keep pace with what the bad guys have got available to themselves. I think that the one thing I see certainly in the past 18 months, 2 years is a big increase in board level engagement on cyber risk. And it's no longer just an issue for technology teams to be managing. These are big business issues that need to be considered. And what's pushed it onto the board agenda, I think, is the prevalence of ransomware attacks on big corporates, because that goes straight to the board. The question of whether you pay or you don't pay a ransom. My team runs hundreds of crisis simulations a year for clients to help them practice a response to a disaster. And I would say 95% of those are cyber related, and most of those are ransomware related, because there's fear at the top that actually we need to get our ducks in order to make sure that we can deal with this kind of event when it occurs, rather than realize that actually you haven't got the plan in place at the moment at which you get attacked.
Right. All right. Energy transitions. We're hearing a lot of talk about energy transitions these days. John, how should businesses be thinking about this, specifically with respect to vulnerabilities and diversification?
Yeah, I think there's a huge shift happening at the moment. I mean, I just heard this last week that the UK shut down their last coal-fired power plant. That's an astonishing feat, for a country and an economy that was relied on coal for power generation for over 100 years. So quite an amazing time to be alive and be a part of this. But it's happening everywhere, and it is happening at pace. We're seeing incredible increases in electrification, not only in generation of electricity in a low carbon manner with a lot of renewables and solar and wind power coming on stream, but also in the end use of electricity. Incredible penetration of electric vehicles in the global motor fleet at the moment, especially in certain countries. And that's only going to continue. But I think the real message here is it's not just about electrification. It's about that good old friend of ours of risk management, diversification. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and say, look, I just want to have a product that's just going to be about electricity. It might be a product that's powered or a service that's related to the hydrogen economy, for example. So we've got to, really as business people, be aware of what's going on out there in the energy transition. And be prepared for it in terms of resilience and diversity in terms of supply.
Martin, how does this concept of diversification apply to the digital infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's equally crucial that we have these kind of diversification as well, right? So you should not put all your infrastructure and everything that you use just into one data center. Obviously, you need to have disaster recovery locations. But going forward, even if you are especially if you're a larger or even a global company, you might also want to rely not only on one hyperscaler, but on more than one, so that you can really work also if some servers are not down for a period of time. Because I think more and more of our business is really relying on the underlying infrastructure that everything is running. And this just starts with email or Teams and everything else, but it goes down to also ordering processes, invoicing and whatnot. And this needs to be protected at all cost. So it definitely needs to be super safe, and therefore resilience is highly important. So keep the company safe and keep it resilient. And I think even the DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act of the EU, is another stepping stone towards that, at least in the finance industry.
And James, how is energy diversification playing out for multinational clients?
I mean, one could argue the situation is a little bit more stable than it has been because of increase in availability of product coming from the Middle East in particular. I mean, notwithstanding all the geopolitical challenges that are happening there at the moment. I think for multinationals, though, it's less, in my view, a question for the assets that they own, and more the assets that they're relying upon within their supply chains, bringing it back to a kind of a logistics question. Because you have control over your own assets, but you don't necessarily have control over the supply chain, who will be operating in parts of the world where diversified sources of energy are just not available yet. So you're going to be running a level of risk for quite some time. And just to pick up another point, actually, that John mentioned about diversification, I think the other side of that coin could be fragmentation. I can see a world whereby businesses are diversifying their energy mix, and in doing so, open themselves up to risk associated with availability of simple things like mechanics to actually maintain some of this equipment. Years ago, we all went down to the gas station and got diesel. Now we can get hydrogen, we can get electricity, we can get biofuels and various other things. So, if we're fragmented, that makes that a little bit less controllable.
All right, last question, speed round. In one sentence, what is the most important action leaders should take right now to build resilience in the face of global risks? Let's start with Martin.
One sentence. Wow, that's tough. So I think it's super important, and therefore the discussion was great today, that we need to understand all our risks, so that once we know them, we can also start building plans how we want to react in times of a crisis.
All right, James.
Sound like a broken record, but map your supply chain. Use that data I was talking about to do that mapping. Because if you don't do it, somebody else will, probably your competitor.
All right, John.
Okay, final sentence. So I think these global risks manifest locally. I talked about that with the extreme weather. So don't get hung up on waiting for multilateral solutions to global risks. That you might be waiting a long time for that. So get on and understand what the local impact is and do those things that mitigate risk at a local level.
All right. I want to thank the audience for tuning in today, and thank you, John, James, and Martin, for making us all smarter in how we approach risk and resilience. Thank you very much.